Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Shripad Paramahams Parivrajagacharya Ashaprasadashi Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Rajagrantha Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Swami Veda Bhaktivedanta Ki Nitai Gaur Pramandi All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Gauranga Gauranga. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yashat sapatnan vijigishamano griheshu nirvishya yateta purvam atyeti durgashrita urjitarin kshineshu kamam vichare vipaschit. Yashat sapatnan vijigishamano griheshu nirvishya yateta purvam atyeti durgashrita urjitaram kshineshu kamam vichare vipaschit. Yashat sapatnam vijigishamano griheshu nirvishya yateta purvam atyeti durgashrita urjitaram kshineshu kamam vichare vipaschit. Mothers, yes, griheshu nirvishya yateta purvam Yaha, anyone who, Shat, 6, Sapatnan, adversaries, Vijigishramanaha, desiring to conquer, Griheshu, in household life, Nirvishya, having entered, Yateta, must try, Purvam, first, Atyeti, conquers, Durga Ashrita, being in a fortified place, Urjita Iron, very strong enemies. Kshineshu, decrease. Kaman, lusty desires. Vicharet, can go. Vipaschit, the most experienced learned. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. One who is situated in household life and who systematically conquers his mind and 5 sense organs is like a king in his fortress who conquers his powerful enemies. After one has been trained in household life and his lusty desires have decreased, he can move anywhere without danger. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Vedic system of 4 varnas and 4 ashramas is very scientific, and its entire purpose is to enable one to control the senses. Before entering household life, grihastha ashrama, a student is fully trained to become jitendriya, a conqueror of the senses. Such a mature student is allowed to become a householder, and because he was first trained in conquering his senses, he retires from household life and becomes vanaprastha as soon as the strong waves of youthful life are past and he reaches the verge of old age at 50 years or slightly more. Then, after being further trained, he accepts sannyasa. He is then a fully learned and renounced person who can move anywhere and everywhere without fear of being captivated by material desires. The senses are considered very powerful enemies. As a king in a strong fortress can conquer powerful enemies, so a householder in grihastha ashram household life can conquer the lusty desires of youth and be very secure when he takes vanaprastha and sannyas. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Gyantamirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadhati Swapatantikam Vansha Kapaturubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Merevacha Patita Nam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So the purpose of the human form of life is self-realization. Self-realization means the realization of commune with the divine. But the practical fact is, Srila Prabhupada is told that the first business, or one is to become Goswami before one can become pure devotee. And in order to become Goswami, one has to become a conqueror of his senses. This is the only means of elevating the consciousness. So this is the first duty of the practitioner. So in Vedic culture, they had a system for helping the living entities control their mind and senses so that they could achieve self-realization from whichever platform they were operating on. That culture was called Varnashram Dharma. It was a culture of self-realization. And particularly the ashram system, one will get training how to control his mind and senses for the purpose of elevation of consciousness. Because in the material world, there are certain persons who may also control their mind and senses, but it's for the purpose of exploitation in a more effective way. Like, example, Hiranyakashipu was very expert in controlling his mind and senses. Externally speaking, he performed a type of tapasya that we won't even be able to contemplate. If the water is too cold, we're not taking a bath, in Chicago. But the type of tapasya Hiranyakashipu was performing, Lord Brahma said that no sadhu in the past, nor any sadhu in the future will be able to perform the type of austerity you've performed. That's how powerful, you can say, apparently his mind and senses were controlled. But what was his purpose? The purpose was exploitation. So that is not the purpose of the actual cultured person. The purpose of an actually cultured person is to achieve full self-realization. So the sense control, mind control is a means to that purpose. Without mind and sense control, that purpose cannot be achieved. One cannot operate on a platform of higher purpose. Just like when we're trying to relate to one another, oftentimes the relationships may be without a higher purpose involved, right? I mean, we experience that most often in the prasadam hall when conversation breaks loose, Immediately, all types of things coming out of the mouth that have nothing to do with Krishna, transcendence, or anything. Because the higher purpose is not, let's say, kept in mind, kept in heart. And this is due to the fact that our mind and senses are uncontrolled. So there is a culture to help one to achieve that was called Varnashram. In the beginning of such a culture, there was brahmacharya training. Brahmacharya training, initially begins with training the young men, particularly, how to control their mind and senses. I know it sounds like a broken record, but this is the point. This is the training, and the means of doing that was by establishing a higher relationship. Right now, the relationship is the senses to the sense objects. That's a lower relationship that drags the soul down. So the senses need to be engaged by a higher relationship. And that is the Hrishikena, Hrishikesha, Sevanam Bhaktir Uchate. That means that the senses need a higher relationship in order to, first of all, the senses need a relationship in order to be engaged, right? Relationship with the sense objects is also a relationship, but it's an unfavorable one. So in order to control them, there needs to be a higher relationship that controls them. We can understand from the same verse, Sarva Upadi Vinir Muktam Taparatuna Nirmalam. The idea is that the conditioned soul becomes covered by upadis. The word upadi means false designation. So according to the designation, the senses also become designated, right? This is Srila Prabhupada's language, and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. For example, if someone thinks that he's a hog, this is an example I like to most often give. If he thinks, not figuratively speaking, but factually speaking, if he shall be thinking like that, then his senses also become similarly designated, right? By that upadi that I'm a hog, the senses also become, so the senses become attracted to hog things, right? Doesn't become attracted to human things. So then even if Miss America sits right next to the man who thinks he's a hog, he's completely peaceful stage, As Krishna says, it was Krishna, as a tortoise draws his limbs within the shell, like that. So he's completely sense control. Even though Miss America and all the fragrances are coming, he doesn't appreciate it very much. Oh, what is that horrible smell, And because he's designated himself as a hog, so his senses have also become designated. So they're not attracted to Miss America. But when a she-hog walks in, wow, this is ecstatic, right? Can't focus on the discussion. You know, horrible smell is coming from the she-hog, but he thinks, oh, this is very nice, beautiful, ecstatic smell is coming, because his senses have been designated on account of his designation as a hog. So the only means of actually controlling the senses is there needs to be a transcendental designation, a transcendental relationship. Otherwise, there's no means of controlling the senses. And NOI, we were reading this last night, text 1. The way Srila Prabhupada opens up the purport is that why does a person go for atonement if he can't control his senses? Because if he can't control his senses, then even he does something wrong, he apologizes for it, but the senses drag him back to the same activity. Srila Prabhupada gives the example in Nectar of Devotion of a man who can't control the urge for sex life. So he does sex life, he gets a venereal disease, he goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives him a shot. He's cured, right? And then he goes back out, does the same nonsense again comes back to the doctor, gets a shot, he's cured, right? No, he's not cured. Because although he's doing the atonement in the form of taking a shot for his irresponsible behavior, because the consciousness does not have a higher designation, so the senses are still designated on the lower platform, and they're dragging him back to the same foolish activities. So then ultimately, Prabhupada says that the real prayashchitta, or the real atonement, is to come to the platform of Krishna consciousness. There has to be a transformation of consciousness to actually control the senses. Param Drushtva Vartate is the language of the Gita. There needs to be a higher taste. A higher taste means a higher level of consciousness. So then the culture of Varnashram is meant to facilitate the development of that higher consciousness, and not just like a behavioral change or anything like that. So in the beginning, there was the Brahmacharya ashram, and the main aspect of Brahmacharya, if you shall study it from the perspective of Bhagavatam, was the relationship of the, let's say, Gurukuli to the Guru. That was the main element of Brahmacharya training, the relationship with the Guru. And the whole idea of the Guru, you would go out, beg for the Guru, whatever you brought back, you would give it to the Guru. If he didn't call you for eating, you didn't eat. You know, and if you couldn't like suggest him, Guru Maharaj, I haven't eaten yet, just you know, if he didn't, it was his training, it was part of the training of the code. So this is the main aspect of Brahmacharya training. There were other elements like study of the Shastras, keeping away from the opposite sex and so on, but the main element was the relationship with the Guru. Because the idea, as I already expressed, is that to really control the senses, there needs to be a higher relationship that's on the spiritual platform. Otherwise, the relationship with the sense objects will forcibly drag him to the sense objects. So then, when there was, let's say, full commitment and dedication in that relationship, then it is understood that a student is fully trained to become Jitendriya, a conqueror of his senses before entering household life, right? So it's not like, and generally the idea in ISKCON, if you go around the place, I've been around the place, is that if you're a Grihasta, that means you can be like, mediocre, it doesn't really matter, because, Prabhu, I'm in the Grihasta ashram after all. But no, actually, Grihasta ashram means you're a brahmachari with a wife. I mean, in practicality, because if you shall study the lifestyle of a Grihasta from the perspective of the Bhagavatam, they live just like, practically speaking, almost in many ways a brahmachari. They just got like tons more duties in the form of inviting guests to their houses and serving maintaining the rest of the society, the other ashrams and so on. They have a lot more duties. But it's not like Grihasta ashram was meant for sense enjoyment. Sometimes Grihasta ashram is meant for devotees, sadhu. So it's not like if I'm in the Grihasta ashram, I can be irresponsible now because I'm a Grihasta. No, Grihasta means, in a lot of sense, it means more responsibility, naturally, because it's the next stage in development in the whole ashram system. So actually they're supposed to be more mature. And then, but before that position can be accepted, they need to be training and controlling the mind and senses. If one enters inside the Grihasta ashram without controlling the mind and senses, then guess what? That individual is going to glide down into the lower species of life. There's a good chance, or in consciousness. Even if he took prasadam, so he might get a human form of life, but his consciousness would be on the lower platform. Adanta Gobir Vishitam to Mishram. Puna Charvita Charvananam. Prahlad Maharaj says, Adanta Gobir means their senses are unbridled, so they drag them down to hell. Puna Charvita Charvananam. In their attempt to chew that which has already been chewed. So without training, you enter in that situation, it's going to be a very high disturbance, a very great disturbance. And then, as this verse is pointing out, that the Grihastha ashram was meant to assist a person in further sense control. Sometimes we hear that the Grihastha ashram is a license for sense enjoyment, but from this verse, what is being mentioned is that the Grihastha ashram was actually meant for helping a person achieve stronger control of the mind and senses. So sometimes people think it's an outlet for sex life. That is a common idea. Even I've heard many times from devotees in ISKCON. But actually, the purpose is to stop sex life. Isn't that interesting? I know I get a wife to stop sex life, right? That was the whole purpose. And the idea is Durgashrita, the word is being used here, Durga Ashrita. He uses the household ashram like a fortress. Just as one in a fort can more effectively conquer the enemies. So the idea here is that in the fortress of the household ashram, one can more effectively attempt or, let's say, culture his sense control. And that ashram, what's going to happen is mentioned here. Ujita Aren Shigneshu Kaman. Yeah, Ujita Aren Shigneshu Kaman. The idea here, I'll read what Srila Prabhupada has to say about this statement in the purport. He says here, then after brain change, hold on, such a mature student allows to become anxious and becomes very processes. Yeah, so he says here, so first being trained in Jatindriya, a conqueror of the senses, that means a relationship with the Guru. Then he enters householder life. It says here, such a mature student is allowed to become a householder. And because he was first trained in conquering his senses, he retires from household life and becomes vanaprastha as soon as the strong ways of youthful life are past. And he reaches the verge of old age at 50 years or slightly more. So the idea is, as soon as the strong ways of youthful life have passed, as I mentioned, Shigneshu Kama means decrease in the lusty desires. So the idea is that in the youth, the youthful energy is there, right? It's like when you see a little kid. It's like the soul's like, wow, I got this new amazing body. I can just run all day. I don't get tired. They're like completely fearless. You know, when we were kids, we used to swing. And then we like do these like flips off the swing. You know, like you can easily kill yourself, you know. But the kids, they have so much energy and so much confidence that nothing can happen to them. They're just like, and then going higher and higher and higher. And the mother's like, stop, what are you doing? He's like, no, Ma, I got it, And then the swing is really high, and then he swings off the thing, and the mother's like, oh! And, he does like a double backflip and then lands on his feet, and he thinks, I'm God, like that. So because he has this new energy in that new body, there's this new youthful energy. So it's very hard to resist not using it, right? It's like you ask, he's got full of energy, you say, sit down and listen to the Bhagavatam class. Excuse me? You see this body I got? I'm gonna be running around, He wants to give expression to all that energy that he has. So the idea I'm trying to express here is that in the youth, the senses are very strong. And we are bewildered by that youthful energy. So we think, what a shame if we don't use it, right? Just like they look at the brahmacharis, we're in the prime of our life, right? This is the prime time, for enjoying material life. And you're choosing celibacy? They become quite bewildered. How can you do this to yourself? This is cruelty to yourself, This is called self-envy. There's a wrong application. They think in this way because it is very hard to resist the urges of the youthful life. Very hard. And if there isn't a higher relationship, then we're dragged down. So then the householder ashram was meant to work as a fort to help facilitate protection. Just like a fortress. When there's a fortress, one is protected from the enemy, right? So when in the Grihastha ashram, there's a protection until there's a decrease of the enemy in the form of lustful desires. This is the concept of what Grihastha ashram is all about. The husband and wife work together in a transcendental relationship to achieve Krishna, the actual goal of all of the entities, Krishna consciousness. And because he was properly trained in the youth, then at the age of 50, he can be detached from that situation. The senses don't continue to force him to remain in a dark well of materialistic householder life. But because of training, he's done his duties in the form of maybe getting the children married and etc. Then at the age of 50, vanaprast. It is not that one's supposed to drag on and on and on in the householder life and think because I chant a little Hare Krishna that I'm going to go back home, back to Godhead automatically. That's okay if you have that consciousness, definitely. But the idea is that if we don't have that consciousness, here's a system to help facilitate the evolvement of that consciousness. So it's a good idea to follow that system, the elements that can be followed at least. And then from there, having properly executed the various system, then you become vipaschit. Vipaschit means the most experienced learned person. Prabhupada says here, sannyasi. And then the sannyasi, he can move around the material world. That's how Prabhupada translated it. He can move anywhere without danger. When he becomes learned, having gone through this proper system of consciousness evolvement, he can move around the material world without danger. What is the danger? The sense objects, again, attracting him to the lower platform. So long as we have not conquered the senses, the whole environment is a threat to the development of pure love for Krishna. Everything in the environment is threatening. Therefore, padam yavi padam natesham. There's danger at every step. Why? Because especially nowadays in Kali Yuga, here's a whole world, a city of many attractive sense objects, which will, this way please, Just like when we were at the airport, many times in the airport of O'Hare, they give you a little box to distribute books. And you can't walk outside the box and distribute books. So what we would do, we would walk out with someone was far away and they're like, oh, he looks like a sweetie, we can probably get a 20 out of him. Anyway, I'm joking. We would walk outside the box and say, excuse me, please, this way. Because we were dressed in suits and a tie, and we used to have this badge around us. So it looked like we worked there, we looked like smooth operators, And then we would walk over them, excuse me, like very grave, excuse me, please, this way. And then and people would just follow us into the box, and then we would say, you get a coffee, and they would be quite bewildered, So similarly, that's what the sense objects do to the senses. Excuse me, this way, please. When you have not conquered them, they drag you to the lower platform. So then, if one follows the proper system of development, he gets first training how to control the mind and senses. He uses the ashrams, including Grihastha ashram, if necessary, to further develop mind and sense control. And then he enters vanaprastha, and when he's further trained, Prabhupada's language, he becomes a sannyasi. He can move around the world without danger. Just like we see how our sannyasis in ISKCON, how they travel, it's a very dangerous thing, and many times they travel alone. It's a very dangerous thing if you have not actually conquered your mind and senses. You're traveling around and you're hearing the types of vibrations you're hearing, they're not very wholesome. And they immediately spark all types of imaginative, sinful misdemeanors, like that in the mind. And one can easily get attracted. And then who's there to watch? No one's seeing, right? No one's seeing. So, anyway, like that. And people have their difficulties. But when one follows a proper system of evolvement, they can move around without danger. That is vipaschit. Their sense of mind fully controlled. They won't be afflicted by material desires, even though the whole world is filled with many such attractive things. So, so the message is that there is an absolute necessity for mind and sense control for further development in Krishna consciousness. That can only be accomplished by giving the senses a higher relationship. They need to be engaged by a higher relationship. Otherwise, the relationship with the sense objects drags. So there needs to be a higher relationship, the relationship with Krishna, as facilitated through the Guru Parampara very mercifully. And that way, the whole atmosphere is not actually a threat. but rather the atmosphere becomes conducive for service to Krishna. Otherwise, one is unable to move forward. So that's my discussion. Does anyone want to ask anything or clarify anything? No? Yeah. Yeah, you can ask. I'm not. The question is, I'm not able to understand the position of causeless mercy. His understanding was that we can only conquer the mind and senses by causeless mercy. But here we're hearing another idea where by a systematic program of evolvement, you can actually conquer the mind and senses. So what is the role of causeless mercy? And that was the question. Anyway, the causeless mercy is the science of spiritual development. If the living entity were to have to figure out how to use this body in a way for further development on his own, then he's doomed. There's no question of understanding. Just like you have many spiritualists today who claim to be just investigating many things and trying to figure out what's best for them. They take a little bit from this, take a little bit from that, and put it all together and get a khichdi and understand what. But if they knew what was best for them, why they have to look here and look there and look here and there? If they could really understand. So when one tries to figure out how to use the body in a way that he's not further entangled, then we are much too small an entity to figure that out. So by the causeless mercy of the Lord, He provides a system of transcendence and persons to teach it so that we can understand how to use this body, mind, senses in a way that we're not further entangled, but rather we're elevated. That's the idea. I mean, there are many ways you can take this expression on this discussion, because another way might be to say that in the ultimate sense, the mind will be controlled when there's the development of pure love for Krishna. That's described in the Nectar of Devotion. That when one develops pure love of Krishna, commencing from the stage of bhava, then that love for Krishna takes control of the functions of the mind and senses as such. It's described like that in the Nectar of Devotion. And a simple way of saying it is that when there's love for Krishna, then that love subordinates the soul to the desire of Krishna. And also that love subordinates Krishna to the soul. That's the nature of the transcendental relationship. So then in order to achieve that type of loving service to Krishna, the ultimate attainment is accomplished by Krishna. We can perform the sadhana bhakti to bring us, along the path of more and more development, but the final accomplishment of actually developing love for Krishna is actually accomplished by Krishna. Therefore, we say love of Godhead as opposed to love for Godhead, right? Usually you don't say, I have love of you, I have love for you, right? So we say love of Godhead. What do you mean of Godhead? Love for Godhead, is it? No, it's of Godhead, because the love is actually coming from Krishna. So then the ultimate attainment of such a loving service to Krishna is accomplished by Krishna. We say His causeless mercy. This is mentioned in all, particularly in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7, I think 177 or 176. Srila Prabhupada makes this point. Yeah, through sadhana bhakti, you can mitigate your distresses. You can develop more good qualities, which are conducive for further advancement. But final attainment of love for Krishna, which is the only thing that really controls the mind and heart, is accomplished by Krishna. So you can say, in that sense, causeless mercy. So I mean, different angles of vision. You can say one way is He gives the science of devotion. One way is that He gives love of Himself. Like that, there are many different angles. I don't know if anyone wants to add. That's my angles of vision. I give 2 angles of vision. Okay. Anyone wants to say anything else? Yeah. Is that okay? Does that? Okay. Hare Krishna. Oh, okay. I think Ashraya Prabhu was. You never ask anything, so this is a tremendous occasion. Let's mark it on the calendar.
Okay. It's kind of fuzzy. There's the need for a higher relationship. That's very clear. That helps. And then there's also, and we were discussing this last night in the Bhagavad Gita class, to some extent, Atyahara, Prayas, and all that stuff we're supposed to control, as you mentioned, enter instruction. Those two things aren't separate in reality. We're getting the instructions from the relationship in the first place. That's how it's supposed to be implemented. But there is a phenomenon, I guess it's just due to insincerity, maybe. But we can look at an example of Srila Prabhupada. For example, disciples may have been surrendered while he was there, but then when he was gone, surrender is not manifested anymore. So, what is the, I think maybe I already sort of answered the question, but what's the focus supposed to be in that relationship? And it's the instructions like that are the focus, or the relationship is the first focus, or is it different for each individual? Or how do we cultivate properly that connection so that the real, guidance is taken into the heart?
Well, yeah, that's not so easy thing. We hear this discussion of Vapu Seva and Vani Seva. Vapu means the form of the spiritual master, spiritual personalities, and Vani refers to their instructions to the individual. And the Vani is really, one should understand it to be Krishna speaking to him. That's how one looks upon the Vani of one's guru, that he sees that actually Krishna is speaking to me, because guru is the embodiment of the delegation of Krishna for the conditioned souls who are separate from Krishna. So then the Vapu becomes important because it's an instrument of the Vani. That's the ultimate understanding, because the idea is that the Vapu will be unmanifest at a certain point, but the Vani will continue despite the unmanifest form of the spiritual master. So of the two things, Vani, of course, is given, let's say, greater significance. Oh, this is all on the absolute platform, of course. We don't want to say like Vapu is like unimportant, but the idea is that Vani is given greater weight of significance, because it is ultimately the Vani that's going to establish the transcendental relationship. So then adherence to the Vani is the main consideration. Although while the Vapu is around, one should try their very level best to get their association and render a lot of menial service, when the Vapu is there. That's most essential. And that helps, especially for neophyte devotees, that helps to create the sense of the relationship in a more profound way, where they feel inspired to follow the Vani. But of course, the Vani is the main thing. So then what happens is that when there's this separation from the Guru in the form of his departure from our eyes, our manifest vision, so this is the greatest test of any disciple. This is the greatest test. We speak about obstacles or tests in Krishna consciousness to advance further. The greatest test in any disciple's life is the disappearance of his spiritual master. Many devotees find it, just like we hear Narottam Das Thakur's prayer, Jayanila Premadana, the separation is a very intense thing, an intense experience. Of course, according to the amount of love and so on, it's a very intense experience. Of course, for one on a lower platform, that separation will test his sincerity. How much was the relationship just based on something sentimental, and how much was it based on the actual the Vani and carrying out the orders of the Guru? That test will be there. And generally, you'll find that there's one may lose inspiration and executing the Vani on account of the disappearance of the Vapu. That happened with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, if you shall read it, in Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhav. I think Bhaktivinoda Thakur leaves the planet, and like 1 month later, Gaura Das Babaji leaves the planet. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur felt completely devastated. And he was unwilling, and he felt incapable of continuing the preaching mission. And he went into like a dejection. Obviously, this is like a very transcendental love thing, but it's applicable even on the stage where we're lacking transcendental love. And finally, at one point, Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Gaura Kishore Das Babaji came along with the whole Panchatattva and the 6 Goswamis and so on, and told them, no, go on ahead and preach, we're needing you to. And my point is he needed encouragement. So similarly, when there's this separation from the Guru, so there are certain devotees who are immature, then they require the Sangha of devotees in order to protect them from their immaturities and continue to pursue the goal of life. And then for those who are more advanced, the separation may also be a very deep impact, and they may require encouragement, or else they may also become discouraged in order to continue the pursuit. So my point is that there are several relationships in Krishna consciousness that's going to help us attain the goal of life. There's the relationship with the Guru is a primary relationship in terms of, because the Vani is coming, and the Vani is specifically geared towards us oftentimes. But in order to continue to carry out that Vani with the necessary enthusiasm and determination, then one will require oftentimes the Sangha of devotees in order to continue to do so, or else get discouraged and so on. So if that shall be lacking, then one may not be able to pass that test due to separation from the Vapu of the spiritual master. Is that answering the thing? I think. So there are many relationships that will maintain us in our advancement towards Krishna. We should not be small-minded. Many devotees, sometimes happens where there's an exclusive focus on the Guru, and there's sometimes insufficient friendships in Krishna consciousness. And one thinks that they're okay. But then this test comes in the form of the disappearance of the spiritual master, and that was all he knew. He didn't have any other relationships. So then that can be very dangerous, because in order to keep up the balance of enthusiasm to continue the pursuit, which is not an easy pursuit, you have these heavy enemies in the form of the senses always accosting, the mind always preaching, doing its nonsense kirtan 24 hours a day, even when you're dreaming. Then you may need one absolutely requires the Sangha. Oftentimes we shall not think that people were insincere and they're surrendered to Srila Prabhupada. But in order to keep up the balance, they may not have taken sufficient Sangha, or there may have been lack of trust or lack of faith. And therefore, not taking that Sangha, they were not able to keep up the enthusiasm to follow the Vani of the spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada says, if we desire to practice Krishna consciousness outside of the society of Krishna consciousness, then we're living in a great hallucination. And it comes in Prahlad Maharaj's prayers, I read it the other day. And great hallucination. So when it's thinking, I'll just practice in an isolated way, then Prabhupada said, that person is living in a great hallucination. There's no question. So this is my essay. I don't know if that, okay, I tried my best. Hare Krishna. Drew, you want to ask anything? I ended class super early. I was like, my goal was like out by 8.
Well, my question doesn't really have anything to do with the main points of what you were talking about, but you did say one thing which made me think twice, was you said that the difference between the brahmachari ashram and the grihastha ashram is that the grihastha ashram just is a brahmachari with a lot of responsibilities, or more responsibilities. And I don't know, the more I think about the question, it's not a good question, but does the level of responsibility really have anything to do with one's ashram, or how important is one's level of responsibility in being a brahmachari or being a grihastha? Because it seems like I know many brahmacharis that have lots of responsibilities, or perhaps more so than grihasthas, and they're doing great in their development of love for God, love of God. So is that important in differentiating between ashrams, one's level of responsibility? Or is...
Well, you can say level of responsibility and type of responsibility, both. Of course, although brahmacharis, we do also have, let's say, a lot of responsibilities. I'm sure you feel it a lot as a Lieutenant Commander. what you've taken on as a responsible. But it's generally quite simple. The basis is usually quite simple. When one enters into the Grihastha ashram, generally is dealing with a little bit more like passion, because you're dealing with a woman, for starters, and then from there, there's the house, and then from there, there's the kids, and then the elephants, the language of the Bhagavatam, means like cars and so much facility. So the idea is that because the facilities often are expanding on account of entering into the ashram, then one has to take up, let's say, use the word type of responsibilities that will keep him from going under the ocean of material sense enjoyment. Because the general tendency is that when there's more facility, then certain things happens to the consciousness. Envy is increased, mental agitation is increased, anxiety is increased, pride is increased, belligerence is increased, and hard endeavor is increased. This is a verse from the 6th canto, I just learned it the other day. That the verse is Vitrasura saying that the Lord never gives his devotees much opulences because such opulences increase their dvesha, uvega, adir, mada, kalir, yasanam, samprayasa, and increases I just mentioned the list. So therefore, in order to prevent that from happening, then there are types of responsibilities that are given to grihastas that are to protect them. Like for example, maintaining the 3 other ashrams, for example. That's calling, when you make, the wife cooks prasadam, when Burijan Prabhu inquired from Srila Prabhupada, what is the essence of Grihastha ashram? And Prabhupada said, the wife makes prasadam, the husband comes out, shouts 3 times, is there anyone hungry? If someone is there hungry, he feeds them very nicely, or else he takes prasadam. This, part of the essence of Grihastha ashram. Inviting a lot of guests over. Of course, we live in a temple, so we have guests all the time, isn't it? My room is like a coffee house, nonstop entrance. So maybe instead of saying level of responsibility, we might use the word type of responsibilities. Which generally because that lifestyle is a little bit more complicated in principle than the brahmacharya ashram. So you might find that also there's a lot more engagements in order to keep up the balance with the passion that's involved in such a lifestyle. I don't know if I'm answering anything.
Yeah, that's fine. I would just be a little, when I hear more responsibilities, like it's Grihastha ashram has more responsibilities.
Well,
I think,
what about like having a child, for example? That's more responsibility, no doubt. Okay, we have to deal with, like yourself, building lockers and making sure the ashram. Of course, some of us are like kids, and maybe that. Some of us are like children, so then you say, well, I got kids too. I got 5 big ones, and they speak back also. These are little ones, they don't talk back. These ones speak back and give so much a lip and argument, and they don't follow anything. But anyway, it's just, of course, a little bit differences there. You're taking on kids, and then there's in-laws. There's so many family obligations. So many devotees miss the Christmas retreat. Why? Because of family obligations, and one feels very much bound by those things. I'm not really thinking of that individual. I'm thinking about several individuals that couldn't come in the retreat because of family obligations, which are, kind of like necessary when you're entering the ashram. So it's a more complicated lifestyle in many ways. That's a fact. And this is exactly Priyavrata's concern, that lifestyle brings complications. And plus, you have to be 100% sense control, like all the time, or else you're falling down. Like in the ashram, you don't have beautiful women walking around you 24 hours in a day. Of course, in Grihastha ashram, you go to work also, but some people work from home. And that's a great challenge, especially if you're not fully trained up and so on. You have the epitome of the enjoyment program, walking around, talking to you, cooking for you. In the beginning, glorification is there, and then after some time, I don't know by personal experience, but I know vicariously. So it's a more challenging ashram in some way. In a lot of ways, it's a more challenging ashram. There's no doubt about it, and it's meant to be that way also, for the purpose of purging the living entity of the propensity to exploit. So that is a fact. I know what we do, it seems like a lot, but, you know, if we had to really compare it, it's absolutely nothing. If we had to make a strong pros and cons comparison, it's absolutely nothing. That's a reality. That's a fact. Therefore, we've chosen this ashram. Thank you very much. Okay, does anyone else want to say anything? Yes. Yeah, please, Prabhu.
I also don't have personal experience of the things that you said, but
That's because you're a brahmachari. You live here more at the house.
just to add a little detail of specificity, I think the grihastha specific responsibilities, there's not only more, we're talking not just more, but type, and then there is range of responsibility. Even that is different. Specifically, is the grihastha's responsibility among many. One is economic or financial self-sustenance or independence, which is very difficult, or it takes a lot of effort. And the second one, very importantly, is to accept dependence. So there are two ways of accepting dependence. One is biological and the other is through preaching. So as grihasthas, both these do come. So in terms of the range of responsibility, it is different from a brahmacharis. In terms of type of responsibilities, it's different from brahmacharis. It's not necessarily more or less, but as soon as you add type and range, it becomes more.
Thank you. That's very clear. Okay. Is there anything else anyone wants to say? Okay.
Actually, from your discussion, like one of the points that you brought up was about material and spiritual relationships. So my question was, how do we progressively move as we are maturing in our Krishna consciousness from material attachments and relationships to spiritual attachments?
Well, in short, like my understanding, you may not appreciate the answer fully, but it's the simple Shravanam Kirtanam program. That's how you do it. Because what makes the what's gonna, let's say, allow the relationships to be harmonized in a way that's progressive is going to be the conceptions of the persons in the relationships. Just like you don't expect that a tiger and a deer can get along at any point. Because their conceptions don't allow them to do so, right? You know, I'm a tiger, my food source is deer, you know. It's not going to be a point where they're going to be shaking hands, unless it's Lord Chaitanya walking to the Jharikanda forest, you know, and the tiger's kissing the deer, but that's not a very ordinary event. So what makes a relationship harmonious are the conceptions that the persons are working with. And oftentimes in, like, let's say a marriage, what causes to break very quickly, like especially in the Western world, is that their only conception they have is exploitation. You know, and at first it works out because it's a mutual exploitation agreement, you know. You call it marriage. But then after a short time, the ideal enjoyment diverges, and so then the relationship is broken. So what makes a relationship able to be sustained on the long term is the conception. Even in you see that Krishna conscious communities, many communities are not always able to exist in exactly the same environment because their conceptions don't allow them to do so. They can't appreciate each other and so on. So then how do we move from the material to the spiritual? It has to be through the process of Shravanam Kirtanam. Through Shravanam, our conceptions will become purified. And through Kirtan, those conceptions will become solidified. This is Srila Prabhupada's language in the second canto. He said, whatever you hear from the Bhagavatam will become solidified by chanting Hare Krishna, and also by repeating that kirtan which you've heard. In fact, when it's mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we hear about the creeper of devotion, right? And you water it by the process of Shravanam Kirtanam, right? So Srila Prabhupada comments that Kirtanam means repeating what you've heard from your guru. That is called kirtan. repeating what you've heard from your guru. So that means you're receiving a divine conception from the spiritual master, spiritual authorities, and you repeat that in order to reinforce that conception. And then through that process, one moves progressively forward. So like I said, it might not, generally you give these type of, let's say, spiritual answers, you're like, I need to do something more juicy, tangible, But this is actually the only way it works. This is actually the only thing that works. And those who try to establish spiritual relationships without the increase, quantitative increase and qualitative increase in Shravanam Kirtanam will not be successful. It's just not possible. The jivas were way too small to figure everything out, We try to figure it out and we make it more complicated. So there needs to be, the more we are having quantitative and qualitative increase of Shravanam Kirtanam, the more spiritual relationship is going to be. And when it's not there, then the material conceptions will start to, get in there and then make things quite complicated. So we want to be spiritual, chant more Hare Krishna, hear more Hare Katha together. That is the secret to making the spiritual relationships. Otherwise, nothing else works. It is practically saying that nothing else works. Yes, you want to add something, then you can finish. Because it's 8:30 now. Is that okay? Did I do a good job? I'm doing my best. I'm not used to so many people asking questions, so I don't know. It's hard to navigate. I mean, these devotees, you never hear from them. So.
You said already hearing and chanting. And as soon as you said chanting, I was also thinking, especially for like Grihastha, Tanuvan, Manobir, all of the three. So we should also carry out our life according to this Shravana. And then the concessions also become clarified, not to detract from the point of actually chanting, but we should try to live according to the spiritual conception, and then it becomes more real, I guess.
Oh, nice. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.